Alright, so I've been revisiting the world of The Exorcist a little bit over the past week or so I decided why not go ahead and do, just kind of enter the William Peter Blatty world and go into some of that territory that we hadn't gone into yet. And yeah, obviously I don't mean The Exorcist 2. Uh, so we have, obviously The Exorcist 3 and The Night Configuration, which is basically what he considered to be the actual sequel to The Exorcist in a way. His novel, Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane, that the movie is based on, which is an awesome title, by the way. I almost kind of wish the movie had stuck with that. And of course we know The Exorcist 3 based on the novel Legion that he did. And this is actually not only him adapting his own books once again, which he won an Oscar for doing for the original movie, but he directed them as well. And so also talking about not just these really great stories he can tell, but the fact that you don't really hear his name brought up. Obviously he didn't like go really far into it, but he was just a really, really good filmmaker too when you watch these movies. So I kind of just wanted to tackle this territory also. Obviously they couldn't be like more different. Like obviously The Exorcist 3 is a much more traditional movie. So I did kind of want to tackle it first, but yeah, and obviously you'll notice that they have some, not just not just necessarily a spiritual sequel, but like kind of an actual sequel with like the Scott Wilson character being the astronaut when Reagan said, you know, you're gonna die up there. So there is like that actual connection to it. So yes, but before we go into the Night Configuration, I actually want to jump ahead a book and go into The Exorcist 3, which is a movie that can be easily dismissed, obviously, if anything, based on its title. Like, even if you don't know much about it, you just imagine, like, oh, they stretched The Exorcist out to 3 movies. At that point, there were still 2 more to come, but and it just kind of seems dismissed as, especially after The Exorcist 2, it's like, oh, well, that's just another horror franchise that went completely south and completely, you know, desecrated the reputation of the original or whatever. But in my opinion anyway, and quite a few people I've talked to, that's kind of an unfortunate reputation for such an effective horror movie to have. Like I said, it may not have the talking points of something like The Ninth Configuration, but as far as a movie in the horror genre, The Exorcist 3 really is worth taking a look. And I assume if you're watching a video like this, you already know that. But so hopefully this is just like preaching to the choir. But I just wanted to talk about these. So talking about The Exorcist 3 first, which I do actually have a DVD copy of, but it was at like a movie stop years and years ago in one of those like clear plastic cases, and I got it for like 50 cents. And I just never like updated my copy of it. So yes, but so our first opening here, our first like shot where it opens, and it's that kind of, if there's one thing you can do in horror to really have like a kind of a creepy atmosphere, it's to literally have a point of view shot from the evil or the threat or whatever it is. And I believe we're under the impression this is what we're seeing in this opening scene. It doesn't. I mean, I guess with the possession it makes some sense that we hear breathing, but I feel like it almost would have been more effective without that to make it feel more like, kind of like a spiritual thing, where we're just kind of watching from this unknown point of view, and then we get the point of view of the steps and all that. And it just really sets the tone nicely in this really creepy way. And then we realize that our protagonist is going to be Kinderman, who was Lee J. Cobb in the original movie, who obviously had to be recast because of a slight case of death. And we have George C. Scott in his place. I mean, talk about not having to really, like, I wouldn't say, like, I mean, it does Lee J. Cobb a disservice to say an upgrade, but I mean, obviously George C. Scott is one of like the legendary great actors, and it's sort of like kind of strange. That should be your first clue that this is a bit more, that they got a legendary actor like George C. Scott to play the lead role. And I had read somewhere he was basically saying that what really attracted him to it was how it was this, you know, big horror movie, but there was like so much drama and so much character work in it that really attracted him to it. Which definitely is definitely something you can see when you're watching it, and it's what he brings to the, not just this role but the movie itself is so important, because there's like the point in time towards the beginning when he's describing the crime scene that we don't see in full, where he's talking about how the kid was decapitated and then his head was replaced with a statue that was painted up like a minstrel performer. And it's like the way he describes this sort of brings it back to like it's we're getting the best of both worlds in regards to mediums, because we're, as far as movies go, we're getting this really great performance from George C. Scott, who's just really selling this, and the way just the scene is set up and the way it lingers on him just as he's giving us these details. But it also kind of keeps the aura of a book as well, the way how we don't actually see it, so the way he describes it, it kind of forms the image in our head without us having to see it. Very much like the images in your head when you're reading a book, and I thought that just was really effective, that they let us kind of see that through his words and not actually showing the whole thing. Which is really great. And the whole thing, how this whole plot of him looking into these murders and all that is basically, it basically feels like a procedural, more or less. But just a really effective and startling one, thanks mainly to Scott's performance and the writing and all that. And that in itself hooks us before it even goes into all the other crazy territory that we know is inevitable. And like I said, some of these scenes where he just really gets to go all out, like we get that kind of George C. Scott signature yell, like the scene when he's talking about it's after Father Dyer's been killed, and he's basically trying to go through. He's basically trying to be a detective as he goes through what's happened, and we get like the scream, and then he like breaks down crying, and then he kind of catches himself and then just goes right back in to like the detective work, like almost seamlessly. And I think there's like hardly any cuts in there too, so it's just a really great performance that just kind of anchors this movie, that's already got plenty of good stuff in it. And yeah, talking about his relationship with Dyer, who's also been recast with Ed Flanders this time. And it's interesting because this is obviously it's a continuation where like we almost kind of got the Casablanca shot at the end of the original movie of them. It's like we could see their friendship blossoming as they walked off together, and kind of seeing the continuation of that. And the way it's almost like a grumpy old men kind of thing for them. And then there's they don't really go into it or say anything much more than this, but it's a really interesting way to look at their relationship when you see that each one is under the impression that they're going to see It's a Wonderful Life in order to cheer up the other one. And it's like, I don't know if they both realize that's what they're doing. They think they're both doing it for the other one, but that's just what they do anyway. And it also, not only does that serve to humanize Kennerman to a great degree, but also the tragedy that it brings to it. I was talking about the crying scene, but there's also that really great shot when his body's being wheeled out in the body bag. And it's, we're looking at Kennerman through a window, and the reflection of the body bag being wheeled out is on that window, and we also get the reverse of that. So that was a really nice way to handle it, and really, like I said, humanize the characters before the story gets all fucking crazy and Exorcist-like. We have a really, much like the original movie, we have a really strong basis here because we've had all this character work that builds up to that. I actually think the character work in this is stronger than it is in the original movie, if I'm being honest. So I think Kennerman in this movie is much more of a strong lead than Ellen Burstyn was in the original movie, and Reagan even and all that. So yeah, I don't know if that's a controversial opinion or not, but there it is. And then, yes, of course, this is absolutely going to be a big horror movie. Starting with these scenes that do bring back some almost feel like homage to the original in a bit with The Voice, where we had, they kind of keep up the same sort of presentation of this with using an older actress to do the voice kind of unexpectedly, like with Mercedes McCambridge doing the voice in the original movie, and then we have Colleen Norris doing it in this one. And it's just as creepy as it was before. And I also kind of like how there's something about the casting of women in these roles, like these demon roles, because we also had actress Eileen Dates doing the face of Pazuzu. And it's like, for some reason, there's just something about the casting of those women that makes it even creepier and even more effective. And I like that they stuck with that with the calling the horse choice here. Like the scenes when we just hear the voice in the dark are just petrifying, and really well done. And yes, and obviously as it goes on, it does get super eerie, but there are also cases when it feels kind of darkly comedic as well, like the dream sequence, where we have things like Fabio's there, and like Patrick Ewing is the Angel of Death. It's weird, and he comes across the kid that was the crime scene in the opening scene, and just the way he says, "Hey, I'm sorry you were murdered," and it feels like this really weirdly darkly comedic thing. But it's still great, and they still find a way to make it like really super eerie and weird and surreal and all that, and it really comes through. And talking on that as well, just this kind of hospital setting in general, like this, they do a really great job making this place seem really just unnatural. Like when we are just kind of walking through, and it seems like it's a normal hospital, like inside the rooms and all that, but on the outside we've got the nuns doing whatever it is they're doing. We've got like the nurses just kind of screaming orders, like who stuck this guy and stuff like that. The arched hallways I always thought looked a little odd in this setting too, in kind of an intentional way, in kind of a subtly creepy kind of way, to just make it look like it doesn't quite belong, which I really like. And then, of course, we talk about we were talking about acting a lot earlier, particularly with George C. Scott's performance. You cannot talk about the acting in The Exorcist 3 without bringing up the incredible Brad Dourif, of course. When he starts to envision this patient that may or may not be Father Harris still alive, still played by Jason Miller, as the long since executed Gemini killer, who was Brad Dourif, and basically his job is to have like two big monologues almost directly to the camera. These big long scenes that are like kind of like the big centerpiece of the movie, like the scenes you kind of feel like the movie's been building to. As opposed to like some big exorcism scenes, no, all you need is really Brad Dourif talking into the camera for like maybe 10 or 15 minutes a couple of times, and you've just got something so incredibly riveting and hypnotizing and amazing. And I think even if, sometimes The Exorcist 3 might be dismissed as just they made that many Exorcist movies, but I do think the image of, like, Brad Dourif looking into the camera in this sort of asylum-looking setting with the bandage on his nose is becoming, like, a more and more recognizable image in horror history, which is fantastic and absolutely well-deserved. And just the ways he can do and go into all these different emotions too, with these takes that like rarely break, and like he's all up in the camera's face, and he can like rage, and then he can just like fall right back into calm and say like, "I'm sorry, was I raving?" and it's just really incredible to watch. And of course, other horror fans, I'm sure, will be like giggling to themselves when one of the last lines he says in the movie is "Child's play, Lieutenant," because of course Brad Dourif said "Child's play." So also what it has here is these, and yes, it does have, horror-y scenes. It does have like the crawling on the ceiling and stuff like that. But the great thing about that is it's obviously there, and they're obviously showing it like in detail, but they're like not really drawing attention to it in the ways you would expect. Like, there's not, like, loud music or loud noise. It's just, like, done in this weird silence, as he senses this woman crawling on the ceiling above him. And that's really startling in a nice way. And then we have stuff like the fake-out on the phone, when he calls up his wife to make sure his daughter's okay, and it rings, and then we see her answering it and then talking to him. But when it cuts back to him, we only hear him listening to a busy signal. And I thought that's a fake out that like always gets me, no matter how many times I say it. It's great. It's like the fake out in Silence of the Lambs with the houses. Very well done. This was the year before that too, so yeah. So it does have these really creepy and effective moments without having to feel like it always has to go like really big, So that's great. With that said, once again, I would be remiss if I did not mention something when talking about The Exorcist 3, and that is what is probably the most famous scene in the movie. I do think the Brad Dourif scenes give it kind of a run for that title, but yeah, this is probably easily the most famous scene in the movie. Obviously the jump scare, and I've heard it kind of wrongly said in the past that it's the only jump scare in the movie. It's not quite. There's a few here and there. There's one actually right before when the dude like pops up when the nurse is just walking around. But it's still very much effective because you don't. It's the way it's set up and the way it's executed that makes it work so well. And there's so much that goes into it too, because first off, it's this distant wide shot, and it's like no jump scares happen in a distant wide shot. It just doesn't happen. You got to be like really close and shit for the jump scare to be more traditional. But the thing here also is that we do get a bit closer. Like, there are scenes when, like, she's walking around and we, like, follow her into rooms and all that. And it's like, this is where the jump scares happen. Like, the dude that, you know, pops up or whatever, that's sleeping in there. And obviously that's our fake out. But the thing is the scene keeps going and we keep getting that same shot. So this kind of only, the guy sleeping popping up only further solidifies the audience's thought that a jump scare will not happen if we are not far away. So they keep comforting the audience with this long shot that's not moving of the whole station. Another thing, a jump scare will not happen to this nurse if there are other people around. So they, once again, give you literally security by having the security guy sitting here off to the side. And then ever so slowly, they take away the things that make you feel safe from the jump scare. The security guard gets up, starts to walk away. I think he comes back once, and then he leaves. And then, once again, you think about where it's going to come from, should there be anything, but we're still in the wide shot. So the last possible place you think a jump scare is going to happen is, number one, within the distant wide shot. Secondly, coming from the room that she just walked in and out of. Because she walks in through the door, we're watching this from the distance, and there can't be anything in there. There can't possibly be anything in there, because she comes back out and is perfectly normal. But then it fucking finally gets you. Coming from the place that she just came from, the absolute least likely place you're expecting. And sure enough, we were so secure in this wide shot, so what does it do? Obviously, no. It is going to happen up close, we're just going to zoom in on it. Just at the very last minute. And that is the reason that jump scare is like one of the times where it's like, if ever you were ever going to do a jump scare in a movie, that one would be it. And that's why there is actually an art to that kind of thing, which sucks because obviously it has been so abused with people thinking just making loud noise or making things jump out or whatever is just very easy. And this movie shows that you can do it and make it like this whole really carefully articulated thing. And it seems like this that really show how bad horror movies do it so incredibly wrong. So that's what that is. Now, obviously, we do end up with a climax that leaves a lot to be desired. That's obviously there is like a notoriously messy post-production on this, and there were talks for like a really long time about that director's cut that Bly was talking about. And I think they did attempt that on like a 2-disc DVD, but just from the sounds of it, it sounds like it's not what they wanted it to be because there was so much lost footage. But they did try to assemble something, but like I haven't looked at it. But to my understanding, it just sounds like it falls short of what they wanted it to be, what the director's cut would be. But so yeah, that's kind of a bummer, and probably is another thing that kind of watered down the initial reception to it. But I mean, there's definitely a really well-crafted, really effective horror movie in The Exorcist 3, for sure, in a lot of ways. And I really like getting the chance to sing its praises and come across people that also feel the same way, but yeah, there are also a lot of people that think it's just kind of, once again, especially if you want to compare it to something like the Ninth Configuration, just feels kind of very generic and kind of the same old thing. But I think it's really, really well done, and once again, really showed how well he could be, not just as a horror writer, but as a horror director and filmmaker in general. So that's really great stuff. But on to the Ninth Configuration, which was 10 years earlier. And the thing here is that basically, we had. Well, I was talking about how this is basically what he wanted the sequel to The Exorcist to be. So what we have here is the sort of the different themes, like the first movie, or the first story, I guess I should say, referring to both. The first story was like the basically discovering that good and evil exists, and they're very much clashing and all that. And then with Legion, or The Exorcist 3, it was like, basically the thing was punishing evil. But we have this middle ground here that Tungo Tungo Killer Kane, aka the Ninth Configuration, was talking about, which is basically the idea, like, pretty much where the optimism lies in this kind of trio of stories. To where it's focusing on the good, bleak as it can be at times. Its main focus is about, you know, the goodness in mankind, basically, and all that. And there's obviously the debates on, like, what it is in regards to, like, you know, self-sacrifice and all the battling beliefs and all that, with him and the Scott Wilson character, so whose name I keep damn forgetting. And the thing here is, it's and it is worth noting. This video cover is obviously very misleading. It looks like it would be like one of those really generic war movies, like Uncommon Valor or like Bat 21 or something. Like, I feel like Gene Hackman should be getting a paycheck for this movie by looking at this, but yes, so what we actually have here is, one of the things they do really nice in regards to the opening is the way they really go all out to set the mood with how we have like the opening song and then like this imagery, and we've got like Scott Wilson kind of getting a look at him, and kind of this almost seems like he's in despair, and they're just letting the music play and showing us the imagery and all that. And like in any other movie, this would be the opening title sequence. Like this, all this stuff would be happening as we get like the names and the words and all that. But no, they let this whole sequence happen by itself, then we get the opening titles. And I thought that was a really nice way to kind of really settle us in without distraction. And it really shows a care from the get-go about the tone it wants to set in telling this story, because there's no way to do this in a non-complex way because of all the different things this story is doing. So once we finally get to the setting itself, we've got this giant castle that's like out in the middle. It's like a dream sequence or something. It looks like it's right out of one, where it's this giant castle surrounded by fog in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of a forest. And obviously it's serving as this asylum for these soldiers that are basically lost it. So, and obviously we also get into the interior and all that. After we've seen all the outside stuff, like it feels like it's raining a lot, and there's like these really, you know, creepy dark statues. But then also the interior, there's just when we get these random shots of the inside that really set everything up, whether it be like the Bela Lugosi poster or like the ping pong table, even the way like the paddles are positioned on the ping pong table feels so like there's such a precision there in regards to how all this was set up and exactly what kind of weird kind of surreal tone we were going for, and just this setting in general. Like, it already looks weird and surreal from the outside, but then on the inside you got to do the same thing as well, and it feels like sort of feels like the setting of Peter Brooks's film version of Marat Sod, and it kind of has the same feel in regards to the characters as well. So and it's a really interesting way to start off with these characters if it's like your first viewing. How you're not, it's kind of hard to gauge at first who are the crazy ones and who are the ones watching them, because it's like, sometimes it's more apparent, but then sometimes it's kind of like 1 minute somebody can seem totally sane, and then the next minute they're doing like a blackface minstrel performance in front of a black dude. And that's just some of the crazy shit. That's mild compared to the other crazy shit. And there's obviously some things here image wise that seem like almost intent on throwing you off. Where we have the doctor, who is Ed Flanders again, who was Dyer in Exorcist 3, who is the actual person looking after them, but whose kind of doctor's, like his coat and his stethoscope and his pants, have been stolen by this dude who's basically posing as a doctor. So the sane person in this scene is the one running around without his pants. And there's just something so wonderfully chaotic about that setup. And we basically just kind of get to know the characters throughout this story. There's a lot of familiar faces like Robert Loggia and like Tom Atkins in them. There's also a lot of returning actors from Exorcist 3, like Jason Miller, obviously, and Scott Wilson was also one of the doctors in Exorcist 3. And obviously, though, at the center of this, as Cain, we have Stacy Keach, who's obviously really takes charge in this role. It was like really sought after. Like, I think it was originally going to be Nicole Williamson's role, who was also in The Exorcist 3. But then there was like a falling out there or something. I heard that Charlton Heston really wanted it, so it was a big fucking deal. And Stacy Keach got it and definitely owned it. And it's one of those cases. It's definitely, there are plenty of other options, but this especially is one of those cases where you just wonder how Stacy Keach never quite reached like the legendary status of other actors. Like I was talking about, like a George C. Scott type, for instance, that kind of status. But now he's just like, he was in like that Chloe Moretz movie and stuff like that, and it just really, his career should really be something that's a lot bigger than it is. And once again, just looking at this movie by itself will tell you that. But there's also the rest of the cast as well. The ensemble, it does always feel like an ensemble, regardless of him being at the center. Like, if anybody's at the center of this, it's actually Scott Wilson for sure. But even so, in this ensemble, the great thing about it is that a lot of it, the writing is so well done, and a lot of the times it does feel just like improv with the way they go about it, especially the Jason Miller character, Reno. But there's also characters like Joe Spinell, who was like, obviously the character's name is Spinell, and then when you look it up, you realize that it was a role invented specifically for him to be in the movie because he and Blatty were like good friends, and pretty much all of his dialogue is improv. But a lot of the movie feels like it too. But then there is a lot of like, more so when they're debating each other and they're talking about should there is there a God, and like how can there be, like, with the way things are, how can there not be a God and stuff like that, but also the direction that Reno's coming from, all of that does feel like it's much more written than some of the scenes where everybody's kind of talking at once. But even so, and it did win the Golden Globe for screenplay as well. But all those things work together very well, whether it seems scripted or not. All fit the scene that they're in and really bring through exactly what Blatty's vision is. So there is that. And talking on this also, this is another one of those movies that, especially when you think about the grand story he wants to tell, like through all three movies, just how much of a comedic movie this is. Like how you could, like, there are so many genres you can throw at this movie, and comedy's definitely one of them. And like we have the whole Shakespeare with dogs subplot. Jason Miller especially shines here in this. It's really nice to kind of see him in the kind of tragic role like Father Karras, and then in a part like this where he basically gets most of the funny lines, and it's also just kind of funny in general how seriously he takes this production that he's putting together. I always loved his delivery of I'm casting Julius Caesar, and what do they bring me? A dog that lisps. just lines like that just work so perfectly. And obviously the comedy does get a bit more wicked, like the particular scene when Stacy Keach is monologuing about the goodness of man and all of that, when he just happens to be dressed as a Nazi at the time because they're doing the Great Escape. So there's like not particularly subtle, but just biting enough to be totally effective in the best way. And the kind of the darkly comedic tone that it's going for sure. And so yes, I was talking about Scott Wilson's astronaut character being the kind of seeming like the main focus and being kind of the MVP of the movie, because I was talking about in those opening scenes, you can definitely see like a tragedy inside him, but he's also just throughout, and you can see that kind of not just in those opening scenes, but throughout it, even in the comedic scenes, there just kind of seems to be something more to this character just by watching him, even when he's not saying anything, just by his eyes and expression, you can just tell just how much conflict is in this person. Especially in like the bar scene, he's really great too, when he kind of just has to let all these things happen to him, but maintaining where he is. And while we're on the topic of the bar scene, that is probably like it's one of those cases where there's that. I was talking about this with Exorcist as well. There's that one scene where you kind of like you feel like the whole movie has been building to it, and that is that bar scene in this. And it's like it's very long, and we know where it's going. Like we know we're just waiting for Killer King to be unleashed. But the way it takes us on this crazy ride to get there, that pays off in this really big, hardcore way, just means everything. And I think this is supposedly the place where when he throws the dude through the window, and he does like that stock scream sound that we all know. That's like I think reached notoriety when they used it when Howie Long was kicked off the train in Broken Arrow. I think I read somewhere this might have been, or it's widely considered to be the origin of that. So that's just really interesting as well. So, and another great thing this movie brought us. But yeah, so it juggles all this material, like all these genres and tones, and it really expresses its beliefs and its optimism in this really powerful and unexpected way. Not just through the dialogue, but through like the really vivid imagery too. I really love like the space scenes when it's the post one of the posters that's just much better than this one, where it's just him in his astronaut suit and it's the crucifix. Is like this really wild image that just is forever ingrained in your head when you see it. And also, and like I said, really tells the story through that also, not just through its dialogue. Even though the dialogue-heavy scenes maybe they seem like they're almost beating to the point too much, with no subtlety, but no, there's certainly subtleties within the more blatant aspects as well. It's all in there if you look for it. And obviously, yes, it would also go on to, like, the more mysterious aspects of it, the more traditional aspects of it would go on to influence movies like Shutter Island and stuff like that, which is definitely worth noting. So, yeah, when I do the versus thing, usually it's about, like, picking one movie over, like, which one do I prefer or whatever and all that. That's not really too fitting to this, because this is definitely more like almost more like exploring how exactly they do go together, as opposed to one being more grand than the other. Because it's really, like I said, one's much more traditional horror movie, albeit a very well done one, and this one is like, if you want something much more contemplative and something to like spark a discussion, the Ninth Configuration is definitely what you want. So yeah, it's not really much about that. Like, yeah, the Ninth Configuration takes a lot more viewings to really like digest and register. So like if I'm just wanting to watch something, yeah, I'd probably go with The Exorcist 3 between the two. But but obviously there's definitely something to this much more than, like I said, this cover will tell you. So yeah, I don't know what else I can say about this stuff. So there it is. And next week, I think we're gonna we're gonna go into like action, and then after that, I think I'll do the Gus Van Sant Death Trilogy. So we have all that to look forward to, and hopefully I'm seeing all three big movies this weekend with Hereditary, Ocean's 8, and Hotel Artemis. So those will all be on a video together. And yeah, whatever comes after that. So that's what we have going on, and until then, I think that's it.